The next day passes under a thick haze of tension and despair. Morale inside the inner circle is rapidly dwindling. Enoch and Varley hold an all-day war council as they try to brainstorm what their next move can be. Even now, they can hear periodic screams from inside the middle circle. Unfortunate civilians still stranded out there, found by the Svards. Before the day is done, Alexander and Yoren resolve to gather a force of relatively hale steel-shod to venture out into the cityscape, rescuing any more civilians they can find, striking from ambush at the Svards, and engaging in guerrilla warfare. They may not be able to take back the middle circle, but they can sure as hell make sure the Svards pay a steep price for it. Agrippa forbids Alexander from leading the force himself, as his leg wound is a nasty one. So Yoren pulls together a good-sized force, a score or two, a mix of stealth and frontline combatants. Leona volunteers to join him, and he questions her and the rest of the trio, given her behavior lately. Hubert has now crafted a Simaruta out of iron wire, in the hope that it will last longer than the traditional charm. Leona feels that the rage bubbling up inside her is adequately tamped down. Yoren cautiously agrees to bring her along. With the rest of the trio and Olivenko tagging along to watch her back with the regular contributions, they head out into the city, confident that they have a critical intel advantage. The Svards, separated throughout the city as they are, have been making extensive use of their Ulfknar to communicate and coordinate, which means Drengi is on hand to tell Yoren every major move they make and where the action is. The first ambush goes flawlessly, as they cut down nearly 20 enemies with no major casualties or even serious injuries. Spirits rise at this return to steel-shod form. They hopscotch across the city, putting the fear of God into the Svards, and, perhaps more accurately, fear of the Tarathi god's black wizard, rescuing a handful of civilians, though less than they'd hoped. Drengi reports that Terbjornsson has entered the city to the south with a sizable host of men, intending to storm the smaller, exposed Serpentis Keep, and Olaf One-Eye has entered the city from the north, cutting across to join his Jarl. From the sound of it, Olaf has a smaller army with him. Yoren decides that Terbjornsson will need to be handled by the main defending force. Hrodir will be keeping Varley just as informed as Drengi is doing for him, so they head north, hoping to cut off Olaf and harass or even assault his force. Yoren and his stealth team scout ahead and find Olaf. With the scattered force meandering through the city streets, he has well over 100 men, maybe 2 or 3, but they are spread relatively thin across several blocks. They plot out the trajectory of Olaf himself, regroup with the rest of the team, and set up an ambush, holding up in a large empty stable. Yoren and Hubert prep a few of their alchemical pots. Felix and the other archers clamber up into a loft, and the melee warriors prepare to charge and flank. The front of Olaf's core force passes them, a column of maybe 80 men, outnumbering Steelshod a good 4-1, and more like 6-1 if you look only at the Steelshod and Sons of Victory that are frontline warriors. As Yoren might say, that makes it almost an even fight. Of course, Yoren hates an even fight. When they're about halfway past, Yoren tosses a sunburst into the center of their lines. The flash does its job, stunning and disorienting the Svards. Arrows and crossbow bolts rain down upon them immediately, and the heavy melee corps of Steelshod and the Sons charge into the dazed lines. Yoren worries a little, as he's lost sight of Olaf and his closest cadre of warriors, but the fighting is thick in the streets, and just as the Svards are starting to regroup and put up a real fight, Hubert tosses in a black cloud. It obscures sight equally for both parties, but Steelshod was ready for it. They press their advantage, fragmenting the Svards into disjointed, confused groups, and cutting them down. Yoren hears a crash from behind him, the opposite side of the stables that serves as his de facto command post for the battle. Olaf and a dozen men must have circled around, and now the one-eyed, wily old fighter advances on Steelshod's archers and stealth team. The squishies, basically. The fighting is fierce and frantic. Yoren ties up a couple of the Svardic elites in a quick, deadly duel. Some of the archers and stealth teams switch to melee weaponry and struggle to hold their own against the Svards. Kara keeps her bow in hand, but she darts towards the Svards, skirting the edge of their force, hammering them with arrows, until Olaf crosses the distance to her much faster than he looks. He clotheslines her with his shield, sending her sprawling to the ground. In the same fluid motion, he chases her to the ground with his steel axe, hewing deep into her leg. A vicious blow, potentially deadly. He moves on from her with a contemptuous look, advancing on the rest of Steelshod. Felix takes sight of Olaf and tries to take out one of the Svard's legs with a tricky shot. Olaf pivots, catching the arrow on his shield. Olaf One-Eye is no joke. Tier 17 or so, but he lacks any flashy maneuvers. He is just brutal efficiency personified. Staggering with his shield, executing with his axe, and with a number of defensive abilities, especially Wise to Your Ways, which gives him advantage to defense rolls against special attacks and tier abilities, Felix might have had better luck with a basic shot. Olaf advances on Felix now, as all the Steelshod between them are tied up with his elites. Well, almost all. He saw two of his men still dealing Yoren and foolishly assumed that 2 elite Svardic champions would be enough to keep the Black Magician busy. Yoren rams his steel dagger into the throat of one of the Svards and leaves it there. Keeps the other one bound up with his sword, and with his left hand, he draws an alchemical pot from his bandolier. He lobs it over the melee of Svards and Steelshod. It arcs perfectly and crashes into Olaf's shoulder. Even the unflappable old warrior is shocked when he is doused from head to toe in liquid fire. He drops his shield and axe and runs, screaming from the stable. This is quite the morale hit for his remaining elites, and it doesn't help that some of Steelshod have entered the stable from the opposite side, hearing the sounds of battle. Yoren dispatches the other Svard as quickly as he can, then darts after Olaf. Fairly sure he's done for the Svard, he wants to confirm the kill. He easily follows Olaf's trail. There is a melted swath through the snowy street as the old man plowed through snowdrifts and found the alchemical fire resistant to being extinguished by water. Yoren is almost amused until he finds the trail end in a towering, half-frozen mound of manure in the stable yard. The manure pile is collapsed and disrupted, and emerging from it on the far side are simple footprints, not the melted puddles caused by the fire. The shit was dense enough to smother the flames entirely, it appears. Yoren sprints after the footprints. He half expects Olaf to have vanished in the streets. I know the players probably did, echoes of when Hakon escaped the steel keel after the crash. But as then, the reality is that Olaf is still horrifically burned, injured, not moving anywhere near full speed. Yoren finds him hobbling awkwardly down the street, trying to find some of his countrymen to cover at him. When he sees the Black Magician approaching, he collapses to his knees in the snow. "Look me in the eyes when you kill me," the old Svard rasps. "A warrior's death, if you have the stones." His beard and hair are seared away, his flesh marked with blisters and red patches. "You want me to kill you?" Yoren says. Olaf just sighs, his shoulders sagging. More than just pain, Olaf looks tired. "It would finish things," he says. "It would," Yoren agrees, "but you're not that lucky. You're one of Ter Bjornsson's advisors, and that means you're more valuable to us alive." Yoren ties Olaf's hands behind him and roughly pulls the wounded Svard to his feet. He marches him back towards the rest of his company, but they meet him halfway. They've remounted and brought Yoren's horse. Drengi warns that more of Olaf's men are converging on their position. Olaf looks at Drengi with shock. "Ulfsknar?" he says. "You have a fucking Ulfsknar." "We have 2 fucking Ulfsknar," Yoren says, How do you think we found you so easily?" Joran had wanted to hand Olaf off to Agrippa immediately, but they have no time, so he throws Olaf onto the horse, and they ride hard for the inner circle. As soon as they're safe behind the walls, Olaf is given to Agrippa to ensure that he survives. Kara's wound has been tended to by Agrippa already, and she's placed on the sick list in the infirmary. Agrippa determines that Olaf's wounds, while fearsome, are not likely fatal, especially if he can clean off all the horse shit out of them. "He will never look very pretty," Agrippa says. "The burns, they are very bad. But he will likely live." Olaf One Eye gives the medico a look, cocking his head. "Pretty," he mutters. "Never was." That's the truth. The wound that gave Olaf his name took more than just his eye, caving in most of his left brow and eye socket. It left an ugly, gaping fissure. Joran insists Olaf be kept under heavy guard. When he's healed a bit, Alexander and Joran will wish to speak with him. Leona, meanwhile, has been struggling with the rage again. By the time she returned to the inner circle, the Cimarrota Hubert made is corroded and covered in a thick layer of rust. Its power fading, he expects it will last maybe until the end of the day. He sets to work again, this time extracting some metals from their dwindling meteor. He begins crafting a new Cimarrota, not from wicker or iron or even steel, but from another substance, one far more resistant to corrosion and decay than even steel. This one he is making out of thinly wrought aluminium wire. In the meantime, Leona spends some time with Hrodier and Drengi, speaking with them, trying to find some way of harnessing or controlling the rage. Drengi counsels her as best he can, as he is the more well-versed in Terric lore and mythology, but ultimately this is relatively uncharted territory. What Unferth has done is a perversion of a mythos that is, if we're being honest, already pretty fucking perverse. In the midst of everything else, Terbjonsson moves forward with his assault upon the seemingly isolated Serpentis Keep. The keep has stone walls and rests atop a small hill, and Jaspar directs the ballista in its highest tower. The Svards will pay a steep price to take it, but they aim to do so nevertheless. Any civilians that had taken refuge there are evacuated through the catacomb tunnel. Steel-shod Serpentes and militia troops move to reinforce the walls while the evacuation takes place. Joran takes the sapping team through the catacombs as well, and they assess the stability of the tunnel. Mucker is confident they can bring it down, especially since Joran is still hoarding a couple of thunderbolts. Joran has Ignis and Nate prepare to weaken the supports of the tunnel, and he spreads the word to the defenders at the keep. He finds Brother Khalid is in command, still alive after all. Joran lays out his plan. If it looks like Terbjonsson will take the walls, they are to all flee through the tunnel post-haste. Once they've done so, he will collapse the tunnel, preventing the Svards from using it against them. The fighting drags on for the rest of the day and all through the night. Finally, from his vantage in the tower above the central keep in the inner circle, Varley calls for a retreat. Jaspar disables the ballista to ensure it will not be used against them, and flees with the other defenders through the tunnel. The last few warriors to fall back to the catacombs have Svards hot on their heels. Joran and Mucker wait until the tunnel is clogged with warriors given chase, then collapse it with their carefully delivered thunderbolts. Whether the Svards die in the collapse or end up trapped there to die of thirst makes no difference to Joran. It's a few dozen less enemy soldiers to deal with. At the end of the day, however, Terbjonsson has scored another victory. He's taken the Serpentis Keep, leaving every living defender solidly penned in the inner circle. At some point after this, the Jarl of Jarls learns of Olaf's capture or possible death. His roar of rage and anguish can be heard echoing all across Nahash. He gives a command to his men: "Burn it down. All of it." The Svards sweep through the middle circle again. No longer looting, raping, or pillaging. Now they have only one goal: to make the night sky glow red. The Sfards set fire to every neighborhood in the middle circle. By the following morning, the air is choked with a thick haze of smoke. Fires still rage all around the perimeter of the inner circle hill. The Sfards pull back, beyond the edge of the outer circle, and let it burn. The fires burn for 3 days. The hill leading up to the inner circle and the stone walls prevent the fire from penetrating it. So in a way, it's a welcome respite. For Steelshod and the other warriors at least. No attacks can come from the Sfards through the blazing wall, but their days and nights in the inner circle are choked with thick smoke, and morale among the common people plummets to new depths. The people of Nahash can do nothing for 3 days but cough and cry, and watch as their homes are burned to the ground. Thank you for tuning in to Steelshod, a series by Mostly Rights, narrated by Taleforge. You can find every chapter in text format, as well as character sheets, setting information, maps, and rule documents on the Steelshod tabletop system in the link below. If you'd like to support the channel, you can pop down to the description and use the Patreon link for recurring donations, the PayPal.me link for one-time donations, the Teespring link for shirts with the incredibly cool background art by Nobody, or use the DriveThruRPG affiliate link the next time you're looking to try a new system. If you'd like to support the author, you can find Steelshod merch on the MostlyRights.com store, or donate to the Mostly Rights Patreon, which are both linked on reddit.com/r/mostlyrights down below.